My name is Dimitri Schwartzman. I lead the cybersecurity strategy at PayPal. In my culture, there's a lot of superstition. And one of such is if you find yourself between two people with the same name, make a wish. You might ask what it has to do with the topic. Absolutely nothing, except for the fact that there's two Dimitris on stage today. And my suggestion, instead of Q&A, let's just form a line. We can stand between us and we can just try and make as many wishes happen as possible. With that, what we're going to try and accomplish today is we're going to talk a little bit about why strategy is important, how we define and what we look when we set strategy, how we set the main points. We'll talk about a use case. We're going to unpack how that actually works and what we've done with this. And then we'll talk about some do's and don'ts and some of the key takeaways that you can hopefully take from here and apply. One thing I will mention is that regardless of the size of the company, this is still applicable, and we'll talk about why and how. Of course, at the end, if you don't want to make a wish, we'll take some questions. So let's define what we're talking about and why this function is important and why a lot of times in our day-to-day, we essentially neglect the strategic part of our work. Problem statements that exist in all of our days and in all of our profession in how we try to defend is that there is a shortage of talent, we all know this, and there is an abundance of security incident or in general security work. So we find ourselves oftentimes very much focused on the tactical. We don't really have the luxury or the opportunity to miss, and so a lot of the time the tactical overwhelms and takes over what we're trying to accomplish on a longer term. So the whole notion of trying to be a little bit more, just bear with me, I'm going to use a word, proactive, is a little bit challenging. If you look at how Gartner looks at the strategy planning process, it's the high level concept makes sense. But when we looked at it, we said, okay, these are very good general terms. How do we actually apply them? How do we unpack this to functions that can contribute to this? So the business drivers, technology drivers, environmental drivers are actually very well put. The question is, what does that mean for us, for our industry, and what that will mean to all of you? So we'll talk about that. And then we looked at the steps and we decided that we're going to take a slightly different approach, a little bit more at depth, and that's what we're going to unpack. So what are the key components? Let's start with the first three aspects that I've mentioned. We're looking at security landscape, business, compliance, and regulation. What does that mean? So if we're looking at, and they're not positioned in a particular order, however, I do want to start with what is important to all of us as we defend the organization that we work at, the business. Eventually, I think we can all agree that our job is to protect the business, but also to enable the business. The business needs to always move forward. Whether if it's new capabilities, new products, new features, doesn't matter. We cannot be a blocker. If we're a blocker, then we have internal struggles, we have internal problems. We don't know what we're defending against. So the business, understanding where the business is moving and progressing is key. What does that mean? And some of the questions that you can ask. Am I aware of where the business is going? And am I aware at the right time? Meaning you might be called to help, you might be called to assess, you might be called to provide some guidance, but at what stage? Is it already in production? Are you already testing it? It might be already a little bit too late because you might be missing some of the controls. So the question that you can take from here is, at what stage am I or someone from my team is involved in the process of where the business is going? The earlier, obviously, the better. The security landscape, we can talk about, and I'm sure there have been plenty of sessions talking about the various incidents and the various new types of attacks that's never going to stop, but also what are the current development? That's why we're all here, right? To see what's happening in our space, where the companies are going, what offerings they're providing, what kind of new types of threats they're defending against. Lastly, definitely not least important of anything, is what are the requirements in your space? Are you in finance? Are you in healthcare? What are the regulation that exists today, but more importantly, what's evolving? There's more and more requirements, especially if you're a multinational business, especially if you operate in multiple countries. There are variations, there are differences. Again, the question that you should take from here, where are you in that process, in that step of, hey, the business is about to expand into a new country. Do we need to make any adjustments? Where will this meet security? So if we look at an effective driver and we take that into components, and we start to breaking that a little bit further down, we're saying, okay, we understand what's the current landscape of regulation and compliance and where it's evolving. We understand some of the best practices, frameworks, different control sets that exist. And at this point, you also need to understand what is more applicable to your industry, to your business, not everything under the sun, and where the business is going. So the section, what are my competitors doing, is really understanding, is the business about to step into something brand new that we have no eyes on? Because that can not only substantially impact your ability to defend, but it's also derailing completely your plan and what you want to do. Understanding what are some of the technical aspects, and we'll unpack this, where am I at right now? Now, I mentioned that regardless of the size of the organization, one of the key factors, and if there's one thing that I would like you to take away from here today, is who on your team, it could be you, it could be someone, that you're going to put and designate as the individual responsible for defining where we need to go. So in the sense of a map, defining where we want to go. In our particular case, that's the security architecture team, and Dimitri will talk about that. In your case, it could be anyone else, but the key component, and we'll come back throughout our talk, is to defend that individual from the day-to-day. Remember how I started? That our day-to-day takes over our ability to actually think about tomorrow. That individual needs to be guarded and shielded from the tactical work. Not always easy, but it's key component to actually making this successful. What I've said in terms of how we do this, you will see different functions that exist on my team. These are just how we define them. What matters is not the existence of said function, but rather what they represent. The reason why there's an infinity loop is because it's a never-ending process. And the key here is that if you define a target state of where you need to go, you define a strategic direction, you can't stop. Because if we go back to the previous slides, the business keeps on going, the regulatory landscape keeps on evolving, and the industry keeps on progressing forward. So it's an iterative process. What this infinity loop also represents is the feedback loop between the different functions. Meaning, defining where we go cannot be done in a vacuum state. Let's unpack this for a second. Security architecture, the responsibility here is to say, look, in a particular topic, we're looking at where we need to go while taking into consideration the business, the regulatory landscape, the involvement that's happening in our industry, the threats. This is where we need to go. We also understand where we're at right now. Naturally, where you're going with this is, so if we have where we need to go and we have where we're at right now, there's a gap. What do we do with that? So we have a threat modeling group that is responsible to look at essentially a stress test of not only where we need to go, but also what we're evolving, what we're developing. Is that the right thing? Because, again, we live in a very dynamic space. So threats keep on evolving. So this function is actually playing on both sides. They're also looking forward. Let's analyze where we're going with this. But they're also analyzing the work that is ongoing. Does it make sense? Are there any emerging threats that we need to stress this against? So that, hey, we might be developing something and we're heads down working on it, but we might be missing something brand new on the threat landscape that this is not going to hold. Product. Our internal product management team is focused on taking that delta between target state, current state, and unpack to what do we need to develop. Here's something that you haven't heard me say from the beginning. I am not talking about the how. There are engineers, there are developers, that's their responsibility, finding the how. The what is unpacking big blocks of, here's the delta that you have between where you need to go, where we're at, and that delta needs to turn into a roadmap. Now that's an iterative process because they also need to prioritize against exactly the threats. So the threat modeling keeps on stress testing, okay, what you've defined, does it sustain the threats that we're seeing and evaluating against? If not, that's a feedback loop into reprioritizing the backlog. Program is responsible to make sure that we're hitting the milestones of what we're developing. Program is a key function to make sure that you're on track in terms of resources, you're on track in terms of milestones, that you're actually moving forward. Security consulting, and again, it might be a completely different function, it might be you, is responsible for, that's the door through which all of the business goes through when they need help with security. It's a critical feedback point for us. Because if we miss something on understanding where the business is going, that's another touch point where we can catch it. The business is saying we're evolving a new capability, we're not sure what the security controls that need to be in place, they go through security consulting. Consulting raises a flag and goes to whether if it's product or security architecture and says, there's something new, we're not sure that we've taken that into account. Rinse, repeat. We go back to our target states. Do we need to incorporate that? In some cases, I will do a little caveat. The business is progressing and moving faster than we're developing where we need to go. In that case, it's on us as the security group to be agile enough to support that. So it's all great on the slide, but if business is pressing, you might need to be a little bit quicker on your feet. Marketing. That's a function that hasn't been mentioned in a lot of what we talk about or what we deal with. Not only has security been at times, a bit of a perceived, I will say, as a business blocker, we've also, as security functions, have been challenged with communicating what is changing. And not only what is changing, but why we're changing it. By doing so, by explaining where we're going and why, and elaborating on the capabilities that are being developed, we're actually pulling the organization closer to us because they understand what we're defending against. So if now there's a certain disruption by introducing a new security tool or by new security control, if done properly with proper comms and proper explanation of why we're doing this, the acceptance in the business goes a lot smoother. Versus not only did you disrupt my day-to-day, but you also didn't tell me what's going on. And so if you package that in a constant feedback loop, you will see that each function here is responsible for providing information back to the other. So if marketing goes out and says, here's what we're doing, and now there is a feedback loop built in from those that we're marketing to, we might actually identify areas that we've missed. And that goes back to target states. Or it could actually go back directly to product management saying, it's great that you've defined, you might have talked to this amount of customers, but this other segment that's going to be also impacted by what we're delivering, they don't know what's happening and they're not really happy about it. Plus they have 3 other use cases that they brought to my attention. So what it allows you not only to think strategically where you're going, but also get a lot closer within your organization to make sure that you're providing and you're listening. So it's no longer security is detached from the business. It's no longer security detached from the organization and developers and engineers, but rather we're all here to secure the business and make sure that it moves forward. This is how we do it. So if you overlay all of it together, you start seeing where we need to go. And you start looking at actually how we define the cybersecurity strategy. Now, all different components do not exist without the others. You could remove some of them. Absolutely up to you. It's a question of resources, attention, and ability to define who does what. One more thing I'll say about this model is that it doesn't have to be fully dedicated resource. Meaning, you could say, I will protect X percentage of time from my team. Again, I'm not overlooking and addressing the first thing that I said in my first slide around talent shortage. You might say, that's all great, PayPal, big company. True, but it's not like we have less work. It's the question of, can we carve out and define that X percentage of time for certain individuals will be devoted to this work. So you can decide that there's essentially a prioritization mechanism and who's working on what. So in theory, that's awesome. What does that mean in practice? So what we'll do is we'll take a look at a use case and how we apply this to we did a pilot of testing this out, and here's how it worked. Dimitri?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Dimitri. I'm the other Dimitri you alluded to, and I'm leading the security architecture at PayPal. I'm also an adjunct professor of cybersecurity at Yeshiva University in New York. It's really great to be here. And a key takeaway from what Dimitri just described is that when we put together strategy, there are 2 things you really have to pay close attention to. One of them is the stakeholder involvement in what you're trying to do, and the second one, iterability. You're going to be doing that thing again and again and again. Kind of a rinse and repeat cycle that's going to go on for a while. Keep that in mind as we go through an example that we have over here that shows the various parts and how they fit together. Okay. So this particular case that I have here is centered around the control effectiveness on traffic that traverses your secure domain. For example, traffic from your enterprise into the internet or from your cloud presence on the internet, right? Pretty simple example. Everybody has that, at least now. I'm not going to talk about ZTA. I'm not going to talk about LLMs, just pretty simple stuff. Everybody has that structure in place. So here's where you begin to kind of draw a canvas, right? It will be multidimensional, as Dimitri was alluded to. The first one is you need to understand where you are. By show of hand in this room, and let's be honest, how many of you think your documentation in your enterprise is excellent? And if everybody raised their hands, I'll come work for you. See me at the end of my talk. The reality is that the state of documentation varies from non-existent to adequate enough to address your internal audit or external regulators. So that is something you need to be mindful as you go through the process, right? That you may find cases of documentation is wrong, dispersed, incorrect, or as I just said, pure non-existent. You're going to have to adjust to that. And this is an area where a lot of people just throw up the towel and say, you know what, forget it, just I'm not even dealing with that. But you have to deal with that. You have to document your current state. So in this particular example, you need to document your network topology. You need to understand your active and passive elements when traffic passes, right? Your WAFs, your firewalls, your TLS intercept architecture, your DDoS mitigation. It can vary from simple controls you may have in a WAF or rate limiting to fairly sophisticated homegrown solution that we have at PayPal that handles the traffic, or multi-CDN architectures that you have to take into consideration. But you have to go through that exercise and identify which one's applicable for you. The second one that Dimitri was alluded to, we're blowing up the diagram, the various constituencies, is the drivers from the business. And that can come through a lot of different ways. It can come from the consulting team, can come through your business function, it can come from you as a security architect, talking to business, just position yourself to the very front, shift left, talk to people, get some feedback. And you'll be getting a lot of feedback, hopefully. And that's a crucial aspect of the overall process in painting this canvas. If you cannot get what the business wants or what sort of the gripes are, you're probably going to be design architecture not actionable. So spend the time over here, get your various inputs synthesized, understand what people want. In our case at PayPal, we pride ourselves being having very low friction when customers use our product. Right? So low latency, for example, for us is a very key requirement. That may vary for other organizations depending on what you have, where you come from, whether you come from financial service or healthcare. Some of your requirements may vary. But do spend the time and do get the feedback from your constituency. Listen to their gripes. They will be revealing to you what is not working. That's a key input over there. The other one, obviously, is, as Dimitri alluded to, the regulatory and other policy requirements that we have within your organization. An obvious one in this example would be any DLP considerations, any controls you want to have on data exfiltration, and the like. This is also an area where you may want to start about pushing back at some of the old controls. Right? I'll give you an example. About 6 years ago, I was the lead consultant for a large multi-cloud deployment for a big bank. That's 120,000 users. And we're designing, deploying to the cloud, and all of a sudden, you want to go from just that being an extension of your enterprise to actually using it and have people coming from the internet in your cloud presence. Right? We came to a standstill because there was a requirement that you have to retain 30 days of all data traversing that boundary. Doesn't matter what, whether you're on-prem or in the cloud. And if you're in the financial service, that's a pretty common requirement for a lot of the banks. So how do you do it on-prem? You deploy an optical infrastructure, you just pretty much copy everything, and you store it away. Can you do it in the cloud? No. The cloud was not designed to allow you to be able to capture all that volume en masse. It's not possible. So, we had to go back and forth with the risk folks, right, and just to explain to them, listen, can't be done. So, well, control says you got it done, go do it. So, okay. Why don't we do a statistical analysis of the traffic that's been collected at that point? And we found about 99% was encrypted. Okay? So even if you store that data, the information we'll get out of that would be probably on the metadata, give you some flows, but nothing really too significant. So we came to a recognition with them that instead of going through this process of the packet retention, what if we were to just simply insist that any service that's deployed on that area must inspect the traffic? Right? So there was quite a bit of back and forth till they realized this, this control makes more sense than a bunch of data that is offloaded that, and it's never been looked on. So you have to go through this process, right? And it's a process of understanding, and it's a process of explaining, and it's a process that you will win you quite a few friends. Okay, so you're beginning to draw a target state, right? And as I said, you're going to iterate. It's not going to come out of nowhere. I want to go through the various examples how the various teams can contribute. And the first one I have over here is the threat modeling team that needs to be involved as soon as possible in your exercise. They're going to have the threat model about what you're trying to do, and they may lead you in providing key capabilities that are necessary for your particular threats. For example, if you're worrying about the DDoS attacks coming too close to your internal systems, then you may want to push that out to the edge, right? So that's something that will lead you to say, I'm going to design a system where I'm moving my controls to the edge, and possibly even try some new technologies, computing on the fly at the CDN, for example. Yeah, that's an example where you will rely on the threat modeling team to give you that background. Security consulting. The security consulting is both a consumer and a contributor to this strategy. They're a contributor, as Dimitri alluded to, that they're going to give you a lot of feedback. They're going to give you a lot of what you need to keep revising the target state as you go through. They're also a consumer. Right? At the end of putting together target sets, you can have some reference architectures that's going to make it easy for them to respond to the business. The business wants to deploy a solution that requires an egress and ingress. They're going to have that from you. That is a byproduct of putting together target state, strong architectures that can be utilized effectively by the security consulting team. And they're also the finger on your pulse. As people put more requests to security consulting, you'll be getting that feedback, and you'll incorporate in your target states. Now, I will say a few things about the do and do not do in a few slides, but what's important for everybody to understand is that a target state is a set of capabilities. It's not a set of products. Right? So you expect to arrive at the conclusion of this exercise at a number of things that are crucial to you in delivering certain security capabilities. Right? Once you do that and you have a target set that's completed, the question then becomes, okay, what do I do with it? Right? Which is go back to what Dimitri was alluding to. Now let's see, can we turn this into a product? Right? So you have to work with the product team to identify how do I deliver this capability, either by looking at what I have on-prem right now in terms of products, looking at the capabilities they provide, and or getting new products in line to cover those gaps. So that is an exercise that happens after you do the target state. Another item you need to be very careful about is what I call the tunnel vision, right? As you go through those roadmaps. You need to be mindful of interdependencies. As you work with the product team, try to understand what the interdependencies are and how you're going to account for them from the architecture standpoint. At the end of the day, you're going to have a detailed roadmap that the product team then can take to engineering, solution architecture, and implement. So at the very end, it all comes together. You're going to have the products and the roadmap, and you go in the delivery. Now, I've been doing this for about 20 years in various capacities, as a CTO, CISO, chief security architect, professor. I've been putting architectures, right? So there's a lot of do's and don'ts that I've learned over the years, and those should resonate with you in the audience because I'm pretty sure you've learned the hard way some of them. So I'm going to go and cover some of them, not in any particular order, but it's something that you really need to think very carefully as you're putting together your target state. The first one is fail to engage the stakeholders from the start. And Dimitri mentioned the importance of that, to be able to get everybody into a room to try to have a conversation. I personally have a very low tolerance about spectator sport, right? I mean, I like watching the Yankees and the games, but when it comes to architecture, get in the room, right? I want to hear what you have to say. You need to avoid stakeholders not being part of the process, and then, as the process unfolds they say, well, doesn't suit me, doesn't work for me. So you got to control the variable early on, otherwise you're going to have issues making a roadmap that is believable to the business. The second one, and that's how many architects we have in the crowd? Quite a few. So you've seen it. People confuse target states, capabilities, products, roadmaps. For them, it's all one and the same thing, right? My boss wants it done. The CISO wants this deployed tomorrow. I don't care about what a roadmap is or a product capability, just get it done. Don't fall for that, right? Just try to separate the two layers together. Right? As we said, we have a looping exercise that Dimitri covered that allows you to go through the process of turning ideas and concerns and needs into capabilities and products. The third one is bruised feelings that will get you, right? This is why I say, have a budget, a drinking budget, right? Take people out drinking, right? You need to make sure that people do not view you as one that is there asking tough questions. Your role as security architect is to quarterback, which means, yeah, you facilitate the process, you make sure that people understand that, they're participating. Bruised feelings will derail their exercise in a minute. Techno-geek, right? We're all geeks in this room, right, for the most part. We like technology, we like security, but you really don't want to have a techno-geek talking to the business, and vice versa. You want your strategy to also be believable. So I call it the sandwich model, which means that you need to be developing a strategy in both ways. Top down and bottom up, right, to be believable. It needs to be incorporated with the business needs. That's the top down. But you also need to have the chops, which is the bottom up, right? You need to have the technical details. So you have to do both. I'm sure we'll have shelved quite a few plans that are top down from various consulting companies, but it looks on. And I'm sure there's equally as many shelf where engineers put target states together that nobody cares about, right? Just wishful thinking. So make sure you do both as you go through that. Now, you can rely on your CTO or the security architects to be the translator between the various domains as that exercise happens. I think I spoke about the current environment. So the recommendation over here is that focus on the big rocks, right? Do you really care about the particular configuration? Do you document the target state? Probably not, right? So it's just, that's your antidote to the lack of documentation, documentation being very non-existent or subpar. And the last one, everybody wants to be an owner of the strategy, which is great if you get to that point, right? You need to be able to convince people to have skin in the game. But people may not be willing to deliver. So I'm too busy, my engineering team can't do it, or my business wants to go in a different direction. Make sure you manage this process with good governance, right? That identifies the roles and expectations of that exercise. And with that in mind, I'm going to tell it back to the other Dimitri for a call to actions on a few things.
Thanks. It's easy, you don't really need to think twice what our name is. You say Dimitri, you're probably going to hit. So what we promised to make this a little bit more applicable to you. So first of all, I really hope that this is a thought-provoking exercise and you're thinking about what aspects you can take back and apply. But there are concrete questions, kind of following the same process of asking yourselves and asking the business that you can take from here. And what we wanted to do is to break it into a time frame. This is a time-consuming exercise. In some cases, it's a little bit quicker because the scope is a bit smaller. In other cases, it's going to be larger because if you're now thinking about your overall cloud security posture, that's a big ask. That's going to involve a lot of stakeholders. There are multiple controls, et cetera, et cetera. So what can you, if you're thinking this is the best presentation I've heard all week long, which I really hope you do, and you want to take from here what that might look like. It's a bit of a full slide, so bear with me. So let's take a look at your first step. And as I mentioned, if you take one thing from this is, can you put a resource, 1, 2, half, doesn't matter, that starts thinking about where do we need to go from a security standpoint, while, by the way, taking guidance, presumably from you, on where the business is going, what's the regulatory landscape, and also understanding where the security is at right now. If they can, great. If not, think about how you can assign a portion of time for that individual. Stakeholders, to Dimitri's point of you need people that are invested and want to drive this forward. So who are your key stakeholders? Not who do you think needs to be in the room, but who can contribute, because again, you're going to put resources and time to this. Where's the business going? And the key here is not where's the business going in the foreseeable future. Try to challenge and get answers as far out as possible. Depends on the size of the business that you're part of, depends on where you're at, depends on who you talk to. Think about who can you get and that will inform you where the business is going. Once you understand that, can you prioritize? Because again, it's a big lift. Can you prioritize what do I need to tackle first? That's within the first month. Do I need to expand the list of my stakeholders for more encompassing strategy? Do I need to get feedback from the business on the set that I put, because maybe something has changed and now the target state that I put as third needs to become first? Confirm constraints with various functions. Do I need to have legal risk? Again, going back to the point of, is there any compliance coming up that I need to be aware of, or regulatory requirements? 6 months that you're already deep into this and you're already producing, and some of that is already turning into roadmaps. Do I need to reprioritize? Because 6 months has passed, maybe the business has changed. Maybe something else has been introduced. And you start to review some of the drafts and you start to update some of said drafts. Do I need to change, add, remove any of the stakeholders in this process? Or am I good for now? Maybe I need to add somebody from a different part of the business that I wasn't aware of. The validation of target states is when the business comes and says, this helps us, this will enable. Yes, we might need to introduce a bit more friction if need be, but at least we understand that we're now lockstep with security. Do I need to prioritize, or do I need to review if something has changed? The key message here, you constantly reassess, am I on target? Am I on point with what's happening? Because if you have another Log4j, then that might completely derail what you're thinking about from a threat perspective. The constant focus here is on who is responsible for what. So if you look at the note section on stakeholder involvement, you need to focus on critical stakeholders. And if you can come up with a ratio with who's responsible, who needs to be aware, who needs to be informed, that will help drive this and make it a lot smoother moving forward. And you need to pull in and create a lot of champions within the business to help advocate to make sure that that feedback loop exists beyond just your teams. But also internally, the more they're aware of what you're doing, the more they're interested to bring you to the table as soon as possible. Just a few things to consider. Starting from the last one, which I think is the most important one across the board, always be dynamic. The agility here is key. We all know that what we are defending against today might not be relevant tomorrow. So don't fall in love with your target states. You might need to make adjustments. And that might be because you want to, but because you need to. The other key thing that I want to point out is lack of alignment with business objective. That can be a complete destroyer of what you're trying to accomplish from a security standpoint. You might see that as a threat, but if there's lack of alignment between where the business is going and you're not assessing the threats accordingly, that's not going to work. You're going to be spending much more time convincing that that's what needs to happen versus actually working on the target states. Don't forget the ever-changing regulatory landscape. I don't think we can forget. We get reminded as security professionals constantly. It is a very, very important space. There are obvious, very good reasons why regulation keeps updating, keeps releasing and tackling new issues. We gotta start embracing and folding that into what we're working as a target state and as where we're going versus it surprising us. And if there's one more thing that I can ask you, and I know that I've asked a lot for me to take away from this, but one more aspect from things to consider is how do you combine customer needs and strategic objectives? It's at times, and when I say customers, I mean internal, those that will be impacted by security implementing new controls, so the engineers, the developers, all the people that work in the business. How do you listen to what they're saying from a customer experience perspective as it pertains to security? Taking that into account and factor that in will create natural advocates for security as you continue to roll out and implement new things. With that, first I want to thank you all very much for attending and would love to open it up for questions. Dimitri, if you want to. Thank you.
Great stuff. This is a very 2010 question. I apologize for that, but I get that a lot. So what do you mean security is a product? I mean, when you're talking to business, you say it's not a product. I mean, we're a product we're selling to customers. How would you respond to that?
Security as a product, you mean internally, externally?
Internally, or
Internally.
even just grasping the idea that security can or is a product.
Security, we tend to be trying more as security as a service.
Right.
So we're providing service to the business. How we're providing that service is our problem, really. It's for us to decide. But the main objective is to make sure that we're constantly, we're a SaaS, we're security as a service, that we're constantly providing that. It's convincing the business that you need this service and that this service is here to help you and not to halt you. But that's a constant function and a constant need, and we do that through marketing a lot of the times.
Right.
Of constantly communicating, here's what we're doing, here's why we need this, here's why you need this, etc.
All right, thank you.
Thanks for the question.
Okay. Hey, thanks for all this great information and the insights and the structure that you're using. I'm gonna wish that my flights are on time tomorrow. My question is, we're operating our strategy process as an annual process to collect the drivers, right, shape them with threats, et cetera, because it aligns with a budgeting, methodology. But I'm just wondering, is this an annual ongoing process? And I'm sorry, is it an agile ongoing process? Demands come in and we triage them and we put them through the process and then we roll out a product, or at least, put forward a budget, ask to get it approved, that kind of thing. So is it an annual process or is it an ongoing, it's operational?
Great question. Dimitri, you want to?
I would say it's kind of both, right? Because on the one hand, you want to put together a target state that's not as time constrained, right? This is the 3 to 5 year strategy. But at the same time, you'd be able to modify it as you go through it to reflect the changing business and priorities. For example, we do review those targets every 6 months interval to see what's changed from the business side to reflect back into the priorities of the business. But the first thing, you need to be able to come up with a set of key points that define your strategy, right? That's the first outcome of the exercise.
I would also add that we try to align as much as possible the work that product management does to flesh out what we need to work on. The what we need to work on can also be what tool we need to purchase. And that is very much we're trying to align to make sure that we identify those gaps as close to budgeting as possible. In some cases, it turns into we understand that we need this, we don't have the budget, so what compensating controls can we use with what we have right now?
Fascinating presentation, Dimitris. What I loved to see was marketing in part of your strategy. Most corporate security teams may have comms team members, or it's just an email and PowerPoint deck. So what does marketing look like at a corporate security strategy?
That's a great question. We try to drive a very clear separation between the marketing function telling our story and making sure that we communicate to the point of we're security as a service, communicating our message and our mission in sense of prepping the team on what's to come from capability standpoint, from the gaps that we're assessing, what they can expect. Comms is very tactical on this feature was released. And they have their techniques, their methodology, which is crucial and important, but it's mostly focusing on point solution of here's what we've released. The marketing function is really around marketing security as a service, explaining and telling, okay, this is why we exist, this is what you can expect from us, this is how you should contact us, this is how you should work with us, and this is what we deliver to the entire business. I'm good. Excuse me? Oh, if you don't mind, I'm going to repeat the question I heard. Is it similar to change management? It's not necessarily not similar. It's part of the overall process. So change management is a lot of times when you actually go and implement. So marketing is before the change management. It's part of that component. It says, this is what's coming. So we're going to start prepping for that change management rollout. So it's slightly more on a strategic level, communicating what we're working, what we're developing, versus the actual rollout. I'm going to take a question from that end just to balance.
Sure. So I lead a team of about 6 security architects, and among other things, we're responsible for strategy for the organization. But I think when we work with some of our stakeholders, some of them want to own the strategy to the point that they want to lead it themselves. And it ends up being this step in, step out mentality, and some of them we lead. Any advice that you might have for myself and my team to kind of help drive that?
As I said, get a drinking budget, literally. Look, it's a soft. If you're a security architect, and I repeat that to my team, is that your biggest contribution to this effort is to be quarterback, right? Which means make people feel that they own the strategy, whereas you inject some long-term vision into the process. You cannot, as an architect, you do not own the strategy. You're there to help define the strategy. That's the key aspect. That if you walk to an engineering team, tell, I want the documentation, but X, Y, Z, who are you? And what are you doing in my domain? So you got to go past that domain fighting within the company. You got to lead them to believe that they actually have skin in the game. They're part of this process. Unless you manage to do that, it will fail.
Gotcha.
I would also add one more thing to the point of what you can to-do list. If you can define a RACI that everyone subscribes to, right, and says if you're responsible or if you're accountable, this is what it means. You'll quickly start seeing who wants to, for the sake of I own it, to no, I need this. I'm willing to put in the effort and actually own and contribute, because it's one that okay, if you're responsible, then we're gonna wait for you for inputs and actually driving this.
Yeah, it's a good point. That's definitely something we've been talking about as well. It's a function of, okay, let's get this RACI documented, and then let's hold you to it. Like, if we're going to document this, you need to agree to, if you're we'll be accountable for the overall strategy maybe, but there are some responsible elements that you guys are going to have to, like you said, I said in your presentation, have skin in that game.
Correct. And getting all of the key stakeholders essentially sign off that
Yep.
RACI is what's going to get you moving forward.
Exactly. Cool. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi. Thank you, guys. Great presentation. Question for both of you. I know you covered a little bit of it, but if you could discuss like one great challenge that you have in your current roles, related to this and what you're facing each day. Thank you.
Challenges in our current roles. Talent. Goes back to what Dimitri was saying about the strategy, being able to find people who are able to perform this exercise on the architecture side, right? And going back just to the soft factor to get those people involved with the businesses. So that's a key challenge. The second one is you really need to be able to convince the business there is something there for them. And the engineering teams as well. That's an obstacle you have to get over to make this exercise successful. And you'll find your own mojo. Different companies operate in different ways, so you have to try a lot of different things within your own environment to see what works, what doesn't work. There's no set way of achieving this. You have to be attuned to the culture within your organization.
And I would say identifying, building, and maintaining the right relationships to identify the right stakeholders for the business. A lot of times the biggest thing is how do I verify that I know as early as possible where the business is going. Oftentimes because the size is so big, there are certain pockets that developing and making sure the business moves forward, you're not necessarily plugged everywhere, and that becomes a challenge. I think we're gonna have time for one more, right? Last one.
Okay, so I'm lucky I get the last one. For you, Dimitri, that one, on your slide, you talk about unable to document the current environment, and then also don't over focus on technical details. I need to have you, can you explain a little bit? Because when I try to document everything, every single user story I work on. So I thought providing technical details is a great thing,
No.
but I don't, is this for?
Yeah, let me jump and just give a
Okay.
little bit more of a background on that. It's great if you have the utmost level of technicals you can have. Great if you have it. But in many cases, you will not have it, right? And it's not as important when you're trying to paint the target states, because it will also lead you to over-focus on the small, tiny details that don't matter that much. So you want to focus on things that will make a big difference and determine what your target state is, not the actual, details that may be.
The target state, is that what you said?
Yes.
Ah,
In other
okay.
words, what do you want to be in 3 or 5 years from now? Does it really matter, to have all the tiny details in the equation? Probably not. Does it really matter to have 10 key points that
Okay.
describe your environment?
It's
You
the
bet.
target. Okay, I get it now. All right, thanks.
Thank you all very much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.